What if I told you that some of the most talented black actors in history were deliberately erased from the story Hollywood wanted to tell? What if the names you've never heard were meant to be household legends? Welcome back to Arc of Ages, where we uncover the hidden chapters of black history together. I'm your host, and today we're diving deep into the shadows of Hollywood's past to resurrect the careers that were deliberately buried. This isn't just another top 10 list. This is an archaeological dig through decades of suppressed talent, and you are part of the excavation team. By the end of this video, you'll know names that you should have been immortal, stories that should have been legends, and most importantly, you'll understand how their silencing shaped the industry we see today. Before we begin this journey together, I want you to understand something. Every time we watch this video, every time we share these names, every time we comment their stories below, we're performing an act of historical resurrection. The Arc of Ages community has grown to over thousands of truth seekers, history hunters, and story guardians just like you. And today we're adding 10 more names to our collective memory. These aren't just statistics or footnotes. These are entire universes of talent that were systematically dimmed. Here's what we're going to do. As I reveal each actor, I want you to research them further. Share what you find in the comments. Let's build a living archive together, because when Hollywood tried to silence these voices, they couldn't predict one thing. They couldn't predict us. Our journey begins with a man who should have been as famous as Clark Gable, but instead became known as the Black Valentino, a title that itself reveals the problem. Lorenzo Tucker wasn't just an actor, he was a phenomenon. In the 1920s and 30s, he starred in over 20 films for Oscar Micheaux's production company, becoming the leading man of what we now call race films, movies made by and for black audiences when Hollywood's doors were bolted shut. But here's what they don't teach you in film school. Tucker was actively courted by major Hollywood studios. MGM, Paramount, they all wanted him. So what happened? The answer lies in a single devastating requirement. They would only sign him if he agreed to play exclusively subservient roles: butlers, chauffeurs, comic relief. Lorenzo Tucker looked at that contract and said something that would define his legacy: "I'd rather be unknown than untrue." And so Hollywood buried him, not through violence, but through invisibility. His films were relegated to a separate circuit, his name erased from mainstream film histories, his image absent from the glamour magazines that created legends. But we remember. The Arc of Ages community remembers. And every time we say his name, Lorenzo Tucker, we crack the foundations of that silence just a little bit more. If Lorenzo Tucker was the Black Valentino, then Nina Mae McKinney was positioned to be the Black Greta Garbo. And for a brief shining moment, it looked like she might actually achieve it. In 1929, at just 19 years old, Nina Mae became the first black actress to sign a contract with a major Hollywood studio, MGM. Her performance in Hallelujah was so electrifying that European critics declared her the most beautiful woman in pictures. But here's the part that should make you angry. MGM had no idea what to do with her success. They had signed a black woman to a 5-year contract in an industry that had no intention of creating starring roles for black women. For 5 years, Nina Mae McKinney, one of the most naturally gifted performers of her generation, sat in Hollywood limbo. MGM paid her to do nothing rather than challenge the racial boundaries of American cinema. When her contract expired, she didn't disappear quietly. Nina Mae moved to Europe, where she became a sensation on stages from London to Paris. But American audiences, they were systematically kept from her brilliance. Think about this. While Hollywood was manufacturing blonde bombshells and brunette beauties, they had Nina Mae McKinney, a woman with more natural star power than most of the names they made immortal, and they chose silence over celebration. But we're changing that narrative. Every view, every share, every comment below saying Nina Mae McKinney deserved better is a vote for the truth that was buried for decades. Now, some of you might be thinking, wait, Paul Robeson wasn't silenced? I know who he is. And you're right to push back. But let me tell you what you don't know about how completely they tried to erase him. Paul Robeson wasn't just an actor. He was a Renaissance man who graduated from Rutgers as a valedictorian, earned a law degree from Columbia, spoke 15 languages, and had a voice that could fill any concert hall in the world. Hollywood should have built an entire studio around him. And for a while, it looked like they might. His performances in The Emperor Jones and Showboat established him as one of the most powerful screen presences of the 1930s. But then Paul Robeson made a choice that would define his legacy. He chose to speak truth to power. When Robeson began speaking out against lynching, supported labor rights, and criticizing American foreign policy, the full weight of the American establishment came down on him. This wasn't just Hollywood blacklisting. This was the federal government. They revoked his passport, they banned his concerts, they removed his films from circulation for 8 years. 8 years! One of America's greatest performers was effectively under house arrest in his own country. But here's what they couldn't silence. His voice lived on in bootleg recordings passed hand to hand, in international broadcasts that reached American radios through the darkness, in the memory of everyone who had witnessed his power. The Arc of Ages community understands something that the McCarthy-era witch hunters didn't. You cannot kill an idea whose time has come. Paul Robeson's vision of artist as activist, of performer as moral voice, survived their attempts at silence and lives on in every artist who refuses to stay quiet about injustice. I can feel the energy building in our community. Before we continue uncovering these buried treasures, I need you to do something for me, for us, for them. Hit that like button if these stories are hitting you the way they're hitting me. But more importantly, drop a comment below with the name of the actor who surprised you most so far. Let's see if we can get every one of these names trending in our comments section. And if you're not already part of our truth-seeking family, that subscribe button is calling your name, because every subscriber isn't just a number, it's another voice in our chorus of remembrance, another guardian of these stories. We're about to meet 7 more artists whose silencing was so complete that you might have never heard their names. But after today, you'll carry them with you forever. Are you ready to keep digging? Imagine if I told you there was a black singing cowboy who starred in his own Western series, drew massive crowds, and challenged every stereotype Hollywood was peddling about who could be a hero in America. You'd probably say, where are those movies? Why haven't I seen them? Meet Herb Jeffries, the Bronze Buckaroo. In the late 1930s, while Hollywood was casting black actors exclusively as servants in comic relief, Jeffries was starring in all-black Western films that portrayed black cowboys as heroes, leaders, and romantic leads. And here's the twist that makes this story even more complex. Herb Jeffries was light-skinned enough that he could have passed for white. He could have walked into any Hollywood studio and built a mainstream career. Instead, He chose to darken his skin with makeup and star in films for black audiences. Think about the courage that required. In an era where passing for white could mean economic survival, Jeffries chose racial solidarity. He chose to be a hero for children who had never seen anyone who looked like them wearing the white hat. And how did mainstream Hollywood respond? By pretending he didn't exist. While they were making household names out of white cowboys who couldn't sing half as well or ride half as skillfully, they relegated the bronze buckaroo to a separate circuit, a separate history, a separate memory. But those children who saw him on screen grew up knowing that heroes could look like them. They became the parents and grandparents who passed down stories of the singing cowboy who chose them over fame. And now, through our community, these stories are reaching new generations. Dorothy Dandridge is a name some of you might recognize, but I guarantee you don't know the full scope of how Hollywood systematically destroyed one of the most talented performers of the 20th century. In 1954, Dorothy Dandridge became the first black woman nominated for an Academy Award for Best Actress. The first. Let that sink in. It took the Academy 27 years to recognize that black women could carry a film. But here's what they don't tell you about that nomination. It was both a breakthrough and a trap. Hollywood had created exactly one type of role for black women: the tragic mulatto, the exotic other, the woman whose beauty was acceptable precisely because it came with inevitable downfall. After Carmen Jones, Dorothy Dandridge should have had her pick of leading roles. Instead, she spent years fighting for parts that would allow her to be fully human on screen. When she demanded complex characters, she was told she was too difficult. When she refused to play stereotypes, she was labeled uncommercial. The woman who could sing, dance, act, and command a screen like few performers before or since was systematically starved out of the industry she had helped integrate. By the early 1960s, Dorothy Dandridge was filing for bankruptcy, despite being one of the most recognized faces in American entertainment. In 1965, at just 42 years old, Dorothy Dandridge was found dead in her apartment. The coroner ruled it an accidental overdose, but those who knew her understood the deeper truth. Hollywood had killed her spirit long before her body gave up the fight. But here's what they couldn't kill: her influence. Every black actress who walked the red carpet, every black woman who demands complex roles, every little girl who sees beauty that looks like hers on screen stands on the foundation that Dorothy Dandridge built with her talent and her refusal to accept less than she deserved. This next story is the most complicated on our list, and I need you to stay with me as we unpack one of the most misunderstood figures in black entertainment history. Lincoln Perry, known professionally as Stepin Fetchit, was the first black millionaire actor in Hollywood, but he's also remembered as the most controversial, playing a character so servile and degrading that his stage name became synonymous with racial self-hatred. For decades, the narrative was simple. Lincoln Perry sold out his race for money and fame. But recent scholarship by historians like our Arc of Ages community members have uncovered a different story, one of strategic survival and hidden resistance. Here's what they didn't want you to notice. Perry's character often outsmarted the white characters around him. His apparent laziness frequently resulted in his employer's plans backfiring. His mumbled dialogue, when transcribed, often contained sharp social commentary that flew over censors' heads. Lincoln Perry was performing a complex dance of survival in an industry that offered black men exactly two choices: play the fool or don't work at all. He chose to play the fool so brilliantly that he made millions, while subtly undermining the very stereotypes he seemed to embody. But Hollywood's revenge was complete. When Perry began demanding better roles and speaking out about working conditions, they not only dropped him, they rewrote history to make him the villain of his own story. By the 1960s, Lincoln Perry was living in obscurity, branded as a race traitor by the very community he had navigated the system to represent. He died knowing that history would remember the character, not the strategist who created him. The silencing of Lincoln Perry wasn't just about ending his career. It was about controlling the narrative of black performance, ensuring that future generations would remember only the surface, not the survival strategy underneath. What if I told you that while Hollywood was still debating whether black people could be anything more than background players, there was a black filmmaker who had already made over 40 feature films starring black actors in complex leading roles? Oscar Micheaux wasn't just an actor. He was a writer, director, producer, and distributor who created an entire parallel film industry when Hollywood's doors were sealed shut. From 1919 to 1948, he made movies that showed black life in all its complexity: romance, adventure, mystery, social drama. But here's what makes his silencing so insidious. They didn't ban his films. They simply made them invisible. While white-owned theaters showed Hollywood pictures, Micheaux's masterpieces were relegated to a handful of black-owned venues, church basements, and community centers. Micheaux's films tackled subjects Hollywood wouldn't touch for decades: interracial relationships, police brutality, economic inequality, colorism within black communities. He was making Do the Right Thing in 1920, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner in 1925. And the quality? When film historians finally gained access to Micheaux's surviving works in the 1980s, they discovered technical innovations and storytelling sophistication that rivaled anything coming out of major studios. So why don't film students study Oscar Micheaux alongside D.W. Griffith and Cecil B. DeMille? Why isn't his name mentioned in the same breath as the other pioneers of American cinema? Because acknowledging Oscar Micheaux would mean admitting that black creativity was never absent from American cinema. It was simply segregated, marginalized, and systematically excluded from the historical record. But every time we share these stories, every time someone in our Arc of Ages community discovers a Micheaux film and posts about it, every time we say his name, Oscar Micheaux, we're reconstructing the true history of American cinema, one view. Lena Horne was supposed to be Hollywood's first black superstar. She had everything the star system demanded: beauty, talent, charisma, and the backing of a major studio. So why did she spend decades fighting for roles that matched her abilities? In 1942, MGM signed Lena Horne to a 7-year contract with unprecedented conditions for a black performer. She would never play a maid, never appear in a film that couldn't be shown in the South, never be cast in roles that perpetuated racial stereotypes. It looked like progress. It looked like change. But MGM had created a devil's bargain. They gave Lena Horne dignity in exchange for irrelevance. Here's how they silenced her. They cast Lena only in musical sequences that could be easily edited out for Southern audiences. While she performed, the camera would focus solely on her, with no interaction with white cast members, no integration into the plot, no character development beyond the song. For 7 years, one of the most talented performers in Hollywood was reduced to a beautiful ornament, present but not integral, seen but not heard, beyond her musical number. And when Lena Horne began speaking out about this treatment, when she demanded roles that reflected her range and intelligence, Hollywood branded her difficult and political. By the 1950s, she was essentially blacklisted for the crime of wanting to be treated as a complete artist. Think about this. Lena Horne lived to be 92 years old. She spent more than half her life watching Hollywood give to others what they had promised her. Complex roles, integrated storylines, the respect due to a performer of her caliber. But Lena Horne's response to being silenced became its own form of resistance. She took her talents to nightclubs, concert halls, and television, building a direct relationship with audiences that no studio could control. Every time she stepped on stage and commanded it completely, every time she spoke truth about Hollywood's failures, every time she refused to disappear quietly, Harry Belafonte seemed to have cracked the code. By the 1950s, he was a recording superstar, a movie star, and a civil rights icon. But what you don't know is how completely Hollywood tried to limit and ultimately silence his film career just as it was reaching its peak. After breakthrough performances in films like Carmen Jones and Islands in the Sun, Belafonte was positioned to become the first black leading man in mainstream Hollywood. Studios were interested, audiences were responding, and the path seemed clear. But then, Belafonte made a choice that would define the rest of his career. He refused to be silent about civil rights. While other black entertainers were advised to stay out of politics, Belafonte was organizing the March on Washington, funding freedom riders, and using his platform to demand justice. Hollywood's response was swift and brutal. Film offers dried up. Projects that had been greenlit were suddenly canceled. Studio executives who had courted him began returning his calls with excuses and delays. And here's what makes Belafonte's silencing particularly insidious. They didn't announce a blacklist. They simply stopped making space for him while maintaining the pretense that nothing had changed. By the mid-1960s, one of the most bankable black entertainers in America couldn't get a leading role in a major studio film. The man who had introduced calypso music to mainstream America, who had broken attendance record at the world's most prestigious venues, was effectively persona non grata in Hollywood. But Belafonte's response was to double down on everything that had made Hollywood uncomfortable. He produced his own projects, financed civil rights organizing, and used his international fame to shine a spotlight on American racial injustice. What Hollywood couldn't predict was that by silencing Harry Belafonte the actor, they had created Harry Belafonte the revolutionary, a figure whose influence on social justice would far exceed any movie role they might have given him. But wait, you're thinking, Sidney Poitier wasn't silenced. He won an Oscar. He was the biggest black movie star of his era. And that's exactly why his story is the most important on our list. Sidney Poitier's success was so unprecedented that Hollywood created an entire system to ensure it could never be repeated. He wasn't just an actor. He became the acceptable face of black excellence. And that acceptability came with chains. Here's how they silenced him. They made him the only one. For nearly 2 decades, Sidney Poitier was essentially the only black actor allowed to star in major Hollywood films. Every other black performer had to wait for him to decline a role before they could even be considered. Think about the impossible burden that placed on one man. Poitier couldn't just be an actor. He had to be the representative of an entire race, the proof that integration could work, the symbol that allowed Hollywood to pat itself on the back for progress while systematically excluding everyone else. And when Poitier began producing his own films and demanding more complex roles that reflected the full spectrum of black humanity, Hollywood's response was to slowly squeeze him out, replacing him with a new generation of actors who wouldn't challenge the system as directly. The silencing of Sidney Poitier wasn't about ending his career. It was about ensuring that his success remained an exception rather than opening doors for others. They allowed one black star to shine so brightly that he would blind audiences to the darkness surrounding. But Sidney Poitier understood what Hollywood was doing. He used his platform to mentor young black actors, to finance black filmmakers, to create opportunities that the system refused. Lorenzo Tucker, Mae McKinney, Paul Robeson, Jeffries, Dorothy Dandridge, Lincoln Perry, Oscar Micheaux, Lena Horne, Belafonte, Sidney Poitier. These names now live in your memory. These stories are now part of your arsenal of truth. These careers cut short by systematic racism and now being resurrected by our community of truth seekers. But remembering isn't enough. We have work to do. I want you to pick one name from today's list and research them further. Share what you learn in the comments. Create posts about them on your social media. Tell their stories to friends and families. Because here's the truth that Hollywood never understood. You cannot permanently silence talent. You cannot erase genius. You cannot kill stories that deserve to live. You can only delay them until the right community comes along to resurrect. And that community is us. We are the archaeologists of silenced voices. We are the guardians of buried histories. We are the ones who refuse to let excellence disappear without a trace. Subscribe to Arc of Ages if you haven't already. You're not just subscribing to a channel, you're joining a movement. Hit that notification bell because every video we make is another piece of hidden history brought back to light. And check out our playlist, Voices They Tried to Silence. We're building a complete archive of the black talent that Hollywood tried to erase. Your views, your shares, your comments, their votes for truth over silence, justice over erasure, memory over forgetting. Together, we're filling the empty theaters of history. Together, we're giving standing ovations that are 70 years overdue. Together, we're proving that silence is never permanent when the right people refuse to stay quiet. This is Arc of Ages, where hidden history finds its voice, and silence is never the end of the story.